Welcome to our first event of the season and our first event under the so-called Trump presidency. It is a privilege to welcome Harvard Scholars at Risk fellow Jorge Olivera Castillo, who is a visiting poet this year hosted by the Comp Lit department. That sounds like a simple sentence, but the fact is Olivera was first awarded an SAR fellowship 7 years ago, but was consistently denied permission to leave Cuba. The ongoing efforts of the SAR program, the head, and I might add, heart of which is here tonight, Jane Unruh. I think we should actually... It was due to her ongoing efforts, including multiple invitations and steadfast attempts to obtain permission from the Cuban government, finally reached their conclusion last February, when, as a result of President Obama's visit to Cuba, members of the Black Spring crackdown were granted one-time exit and re-entry. Tonight is a part of our continuing effort to bring into English the works of under-translated poets from whom our language, our genre, and our human consciousness can gain so much. I am honored to present Jorge Olivera, whose work and the context of whose writing and activism will be briefly explored and illumined by Pablo Medina. Medina is the author of 16 books, among them the poetry collections The Island Kingdom and the memoir Exiled Memories, A Cuban Childhood. In 2008, he translated with Mark Statman Lorca's Poet in New York, which John Ashbery called, and I quote, the definitive version of Lorca's masterpiece. Medina is professor of fiction, poetry, and translation, basically all of literature as far as I can tell, at Emerson College. He will be joined later in the program by Chloe Garcia Roberts, poet and New Directions NYRB translator, as well as managing editor of the Harvard Review, who will share her translations and guide us in the collaborative portion of tonight's event. For now, please welcome Pablo Medina.
Thank you so much. This is a very, very special treat for me to be here in this room, which I visited a few times, and to be speaking about Cuban literature, and in particular kind of leading up to the work of Jorge, who I admire tremendously for many, many reasons. Well, you can't really talk about 20th century and 21st century Cuban poetry, as we were discussing with Jorge, without going back to the 19th century. And I will just be very impressionistic and mention only 3 poets I think are emblematic and who summarized and absorbed the tendencies of the 19th century, leading up to the 20th century and the contemporary period. Those 3 poets are José María Heredia, Gertrudis Gómez de Avellaneda, and of course José Martí. Okay, José María Heredia, who was born in 1803 and dies in 1839, is considered by many people the first romantic poet of the Americas. He was, besides a poet, what we would now call an activist, a political activist. And as a result of this activism on behalf of freedom from the Spanish colonial government, that he is thrown out of the country, essentially, forever. He's not allowed to return by the Spanish authorities. And he spent a couple of years in New York. By the way, New York is the focus of all of these writers in the 19th century. Not, as you might think, Miami. Miami didn't exist until 1898. And of writers such as Heredia. Okay, so I just want to make that, or they passed through. Heredia passed through. He spent 2 years, then he goes to Mexico, and that's where he settles. two very important poems, and then I'll move on because I just have a lot of 200 years to cover. Two poems. Niagara, which is his masterpiece. It's about the Niagara Falls. It's probably, as far as I'm concerned, the best poem about Niagara Falls that I've ever read. It's a superb piece of not only of romantic literature, but I think of universal literature. Not really well translated. And the other poem takes place in Mexico. It's in El Teocalli de Cholula. He spent a lot of time in Mexico. He married a Mexican woman, became a Mexican national. And in it, he discusses the struggle between the powerful Aztec kings and the poor peasants who were sacrificed to the gods of the Aztecs. After that, I want to talk to again. He was a romantic, but also very much concerned with Cuban identity as opposed to Spanish identity, and to assert a certain sense, in a certain sense, Cuban sovereignty. No. The other poet the second poet I wanted to talk about very, very briefly is Gertrudis Gómez de Avellaneda, sometimes called La Peregrina, the pilgrim, because she left Cuba for Spain and would come back and forth and back and forth. She has a beautiful sonnet, one of the most beautiful sonnets in the Spanish language, called Al Partir, on leaving, which is precisely about leaving the land of your birth, leaving the land that nurtured you, the motherland, and not knowing when you're going to return. It is for me a very special poem because I have it very, very close to my heart because I feel that way myself, despite being away from Cuba for many years. Gertrudis Gómez de Avellaneda was also a playwright, very, very successful playwright in Spain, and a novelist. She actually wrote an anti-slavery novel called Sab. And that novel, which is about a slave who falls in love with his mistress, is I think emblematic of the concern that many writers and poets had about this issue of slavery, that colored so much of Cuban culture in the 19th century. She was an early feminist as well. She believed that married women were essentially slaves, although she went through a couple of marriages and both husbands died and had many lovers, and was quite the independent woman. Then we get to the Apostle of Liberty, José Martí. He lived from 1853 to 1895. I told a friend, I shouldn't mention Martí because everybody knows Martí. And she said, but you'd be surprised. So I'm going to mention Martí, and not only because he's a very despite being a very well-known figure, because I believe, and we were talking about this again that Martí is sort of like a door between the 19th century and the 20th century. He is an early modernista, and the modernist movement in Latin America really gained speed after him and after his works, in particular Versos Sencillos. Some of those poems, by the way, made their way into the Cuban song, the prototypical Cuban song, Guantanamera. So if you hear it again, you'll probably hear some of his verses there. Yo soy un hombre sincero, de donde crece la palma. Pete Seeger arranged it, for American audiences. Y antes de morir me quiero echar mis versos del alma. Guantanamera, Guajira, etc., etc. he is a figure of enormous importance to all Cubans, young and old, to people of all political persuasions. He was an essayist, I think one of the best essayists I've ever read. He was a political writer. He was a political leader, mostly in the United States and mostly in New York. He lived in New York. Once again, New York rears its head. He lived in New York for 15 years, the last 15 years of his life. He embodies all of these themes of freedom, of abolitionism, of Cubans of all races and creeds living together, because that's the only way that Cuba could be forged. Okay, it is again, politicians of all stripes refer to his words. And if you go to New York and you have nothing better to do, there's a beautiful statue of him at the head of the Avenue of the Americas in Central Park. It's an equestrian statue, and he's leaning backwards as he is shot by the Spaniards during the Battle of Dos Rios in Oriente Province. Okay, so you can go and see him in action. He was a man of action. He was all of these things. So he opens the door to the 20th century. And the 20th century really in Cuban letters has to be divided into two parts. It has to be divided into the Republic, which lasts from 1902 until 1958, and then the Revolution from 1959 to the present. The battle for independence, the war for independence, begins in 1895 and ends in 1898. This is the war that Americans call the Spanish-American War, but the Cubans call the War of Independence. The Spanish-American War lasts only less than a year, in 1898. By that point, the Spanish forces are demoralized, and it is very easy for the Americans to come in and mop everything up. So it is the Cubans who did the dirty work, as well as yellow fever. There's a period of transition between 1898 and 1902 when Cuba is ruled by the United States. It's a kind of a period of, I think, of not knowing what Cuba is going to become, whether it's going to become a republic or whether it's going to become a protectorate of the United States or whether it's going to become a commonwealth like Puerto Rico. But Cuba did become nominally independent because the United States really sort of oversaw Cuban politics and Cuban life for many, many years after that. And so once the Republic gains steam, there are two figures, I think, that are actually three figures that are very important. The first of these that I want to talk about is Virgilio Piñera. He was born in 1912 and 1979. He was a novelist, a playwright, best known as a playwright, a short story writer, an essayist, as well as a poet. And you will see this in many, many Cuban writers. They don't just focus on or specialize in one genre, but rather encompass all of literature. And Virgilio Piñera was one of those. A very humble man, a man with very few ambitions other than literature. As a matter of fact, he said at one point, from a very early age, I knew three things about myself. I was poor, I was homosexual, and I loved art. 3 strikes, and you're out. Especially in Cuba. His most famous poem, since we're talking about poetry, is called La Isla en Peso, The Weight of the Island. A long poem. It's actually a tour de force of personal and social themes surrounding the idea and the reality of, quote, the cursed condition of being surrounded by water on all sides. No. He saw it as a curse. And it can be. Those of us who have lived on an island can attest to that. There's nowhere to run to. He lived in Buenos Aires for a number of years, and then in 1959, filled with hope that things were going to finally be resolved and corruption ended in Cuba, he returned. Unfortunately, in 1961, I believe, or thereabouts, he was rounded up by the government for being a homosexual and arrested. The new man was a heterosexual man. Homosexuality, there was no room for homosexuality in this attempt to create the new man. Okay. He was let go soon after that. But he was criticized for his apolitical writings. His politics don't really enter his work directly. He's often called the Cuban Kafka. And if you read him, you'll see that sense of absurdity, though he claims never to have read Kafka. But he was criticized. His work was eventually marginalized, and then he entered what we call incilio, or an internal exile. He sort of withdrew to his beach house in Guanabo outside Havana and just kept writing, but not publishing because he wasn't allowed to publish, and entertaining his friends and playing canasta. Okay, that's how he decided to deal with all of this. He died in 1979, and today he's considered one of the great writers of 20th century Cuba, alongside José Lezama Lima. And we might as well jump to José Lezama Lima now because they were contemporaries. Lezama lived from 1910 until 1976, I think, 1976 or 77. He is undoubtedly one of the monumental figures of world literature, not only in his work, but in his body. He was a huge man. And he was a poet, a novelist, an essayist, translator. And also in his early life, was active politically. He fought against the dictator Machado in the 1930s. His masterpiece is the novel Paradiso. Sort of captures the Baroque spirit of the Caribbean in its fullness and its brutality. It's both a very graphic book and also, but also a very beautiful book, very dense, as the Baroque tends to be. And I think the translator of that book, it's only been translated once, was Gregory Rabassa. Are there any translators? You might know exactly, but I believe it was Gregory Rabassa. How he achieved that translation is beyond me, because it's a very, very dense, very difficult book. Again, coming out of that Baroque style, or the Neo-Baroque, which flourished in Latin America. Another novelist who works in that style is Alejo Carpentier, whom you may know. The Kingdom of This World, Lost Steps, and so on. Piñera and Lezama were often at odds because Piñera was a writer, had a very plain style. And very simple, humble style, while Lezama was, as I said, very Baroque, very flowery, and so on and so forth. And they had different views of which way Cuban literature should go. As it turns out, it went both ways. No. So we have the Piñera Road, and we have the Lezama Road. He too was homosexual, and he too was eventually marginalized. His work was not allowed to be published, et cetera, et cetera. But after his death, he too was lionized, and his house is now a museum. If you go to Havana, you should visit it. Trocadero, Calle Trocadero, no? Yeah. The other figure I think is worth mentioning, again, this is a very, very impressionistic view of Cuban poetry because we want to get to the other aspect of the program, is Dulce María Loynaz. Dulce María Loynaz stretched almost a complete century. She was born in 1902 and died in 1997. Her father was a very, very famous general of the Cuban War of Independence, Enrique Loynaz del Castillo, and she belonged to a very illustrious Cuban family. In 1984, by the way, she won the Cervantes Prize, which is the most important prize, a literary prize in the Spanish-speaking world. What can I say about Dulce María? She was mistress of this sublime lyricism. Her work is just absolutely gorgeous. It's been well translated. There's a translation now that was published last year or the year before by James O'Connor, published by Archipelago Press. It's called Absolute Solitude. And you should definitely read that. It's gorgeous. And her work is gorgeous. When the revolution came, she stopped writing. She said if she couldn't write what she wanted, she wouldn't write at all. And she just stopped writing poetry. She wrote essays and so on, but just decided she's not going to write poetry. She decided, too, to remain in Cuba rather than go into exile because she thought that that's where she belonged. That's where she was born, and that's where she would die. And she did. In 1997 at the age of 95. So then comes the revolution. Initially, the revolution offered a great deal of promise in terms of culture and support for the arts and for writers. The official newspaper Revolución had a supplement called Lunes de Revolución, directed by the novelist Guillermo Cabrera Infante. And in it, all important Cuban writers would publish. And for a while, this was a very, very vibrant and alive publication. The UNEAC, the Union of Writers and Artists of Cuba, was founded to offer support for writers and artists, as well as ICAIC, the Institute of Film, and the Escuela de Artes. Was created. All of this presaged a golden period in Cuban letters. Then, in 1961, there was a film titled PM, a 13-minute film that was made by Sabá Cabrera Infante, Guillermo's brother, and in Orlando Jimenez Leal, two Cuban filmmakers. And what they did was just take a camera to the city of Regla, which was across the bay from Havana, and film the nightlife. People dancing and getting drunk and so on and so forth. When the censors saw that, they were dumbfounded. They were just completely disturbed by it. They said, we can't show this. This is not the proper, this is not what socialists do. And so they banned it. They condemned it, banned it. It's for such a short little film, it created a lot of controversy. and it led to a number of 200 writers sending a letter, signed a letter to Fidel Castro, complaining about this. Fidel held a series of meetings with writers and intellectuals, and out of which came a document called Words to the Intellectuals, Palabras a los Intelectuales, in which he concluded, within the revolution, everything. Outside the revolution, no rights. This phrase was interpreted in various ways throughout time by the official culture and the institutions surrounding them. And it led to a lot of oppression, suppression, and headaches for many writers. Of these, I just want to bring up 3. Okay? The first one, and the first writer to come up against the state in a very, very frontal way is Eberto Padilla. In 1968, he wins the Casa de las Américas prize for a collection of poetry titled Fuera del Juego, or Out of the Game. The UNEAC condemns the collection. The jury, by the way, was an international jury. There were there was one Cuban. Manuel Diaz Martinez was the one Cuban in this jury. It was, I forget now who the exact makeup, but anyway, very well-known international writers. They award this prize unanimously to Eberto. And the UNEAC complains. They say, no, this is a counter-revolutionary work and should not be allowed to circulate, and so on and so forth. Eberto is allowed to wander the streets of Havana until 1971, when, as a result of a reading he gave called Provocations, he was a bit of an intellectual provocateur. I knew him well. He is arrested and spends a month in jail, where he is tortured and forced to sign a confession, confessing his anti-revolutionary bourgeois attitude and sins. Okay, and very much in the Stalinist vein. And he reads this confession to a gathering at the UNIAC, the Union of Writers. After which he is given a job. He's freed finally. That was a condition of his gaining his freedom. He implicates a number of other writers, including Lezama, his wife, who was a poet, Belkis Cusamale. She lives in Fort Worth, Texas now, and Cesar Lopez, and a few others. Okay, and he is allowed to be free, but he's given a job translating. He cannot publish his work, and he's not allowed to leave until 1980. And he dies in the United States in the year 2000. Okay. The other writer, I was looking through my library, and I said, well, do I do this person? Do I do that person? And then I opened a poetry collection by Maria Elena Cruz Valera. And I had forgotten how powerful her work was. And so I said, I'm going to talk about her. She's very important. She's a great poet. Maria Elena Cruz Valera, born in 1953. She was a poet, a novelist, and a journalist. She became a member of a group called Criterio Alternativo. And that group was seeking peaceful change and a movement toward democracy. She was charged with anti-revolutionary activity and given a 2-year prison sentence. At one point, a brigade, what they called a Brigade of Rapid Response, which is nothing more than a group of government thugs that come and harass you and attack you and beat you up, came to her house and tried to force her to eat a document that she had written for Criterio Alternativo. Okay, and she writes about this. She's got this terrific piece in which she writes about how she clenched her teeth and could feel the blood coming out of her mouth while they tried to force the document down her throat. And so she was in prison, then she came out, and she eventually left the country in 1994. She lived in Puerto Rico for a little while, and in the United States, Miami, and now she lives in Spain. I think she's a tremendous poet of great force and passion. I'll read a little bit of her in a bit. After, of course, I talk about the second poet, Raúl Rivero. He was born in 1945. Can I call him a colleague of Jorge because he was arrested in Black Spring? Raúl Rivero was a journalist and a poet, a very good poet, and he too was in prison, given a 20-year prison sentence during that time. This is called the Black Spring because they arrested 75 journalists, independent librarians, writers, and dissidents. It was a roundup, and they were given prison sentences of varying amounts of years. Raúl Rivero had worked in favor of the revolution to one point where he just saw the light. It was a gradual process of learning that this was not what the direction that Cuba should go. And it was his writings as a result that got him into trouble, and he was then considered persona non grata. I think he was in jail for 3 years. There was a lot of international pressure to get him out, and he was eventually allowed to leave the country and now lives in Spain, in Madrid. The other poet I want to mention, and just mention because I hope we talk about his work, is Jorge. Jorge, I remember when Jane first approached me about Jorge's case, and I remember helping her out with translations and writing a letter and so on. And I was very happy when I saw him and his wife here. It was just such joy, and it was due to Jane's tenacity and her determination to get them out. That finally they're here. Jorge too was given a long prison sentence, 20 years? 20 años? 18. He spent 9 months in solitary confinement, right? And that was commuted to domestic imprisonment.
Guantanamo prison.
Guantanamo, yeah. So, but we're not, we know his story. I've not mentioned, how am I doing for time? I better just close this up. Because just quickly. I've not mentioned poets who sort of lived in Cuba, have produced work in Cuba, and have not suffered the oppression. And these poets have learned to live within the system, simply either because they believe in the system itself, or because you have to survive in some fashion. And sometimes you need to accommodate yourself to what's around you. If you want to read about what it's, and so there's the whole concept of self-censorship. After a while, you begin to censor yourself as a function of being able to survive and being able to publish and so on. It becomes almost automatic. If you want to read about this, the best book on the subject is Czesław Miłosz's The Captive Mind. You just change the names from Polish to Spanish, and that could be Cuba. No. And so I just want to quickly then finish with my talk, but I wanted to finish with this little quote from one of Maria Elena's poems. Well, I'll read it in Spanish, it's very brief, and read it in English. Difícil es decir te quiero en estos tiempos. Te quiero con urgencia. Quiero hacer una parte, sin dudas y sin trampas, para decir te quiero. Así, sencillamente. Si un hombre y otro hombre, y luego otro y otro, destrozan los espacios donde el amor se guarda. Difficult to say I love you in these times. I love you urgently. I want to make a pause, without doubts or trickery, to say I love you. Simply, that's all. If a man and another man, and then another and another destroy the spaces where love is kept. Jorge Olivera is a man of love. I know this from the moment I met him. He has suffered greatly at the hands of a ruthless regime. But like other Cuban poets before him, he has not been defeated, not allowed his love to be diminished by all the things done to him. On the contrary, his love has grown. It is in his poetry, and it is in his soul.
Buenas noches y es un gran placer
Good evening, it's a great pleasure
y algo impresionante
and very impressive
para mí
for me
estar aquí delante de ustedes esta noche.
to be here before you tonight.
Yo ahora, mientras estaba sentado, le agradezco mucho las palabras, esta excelente intervención de Pablo Medina.
While I listened to Pablo, I was very grateful for his words.
Y yo rememoraba toda la historia de la literatura cubana, sobre todo a partir del siglo XIX.
Sí, I forgot, que estaba tratando de ver cómo... You see, I'm not an interpreter. I get distracted.
It's just a recording.
Just a record. Okay, I'm sorry, pero repite eso otra vez.
Yo escuchaba el excelente bosquejo, repaso que hizo Pablo.
I was listening to the summary, the very good summary that Pablo
de la literatura cubana del siglo XIX.
About Pablo's treatment of Cuban literature.
Que es un siglo, yo diría, fundamental dentro de la literatura cubana.
It's a fundamental, essential century in Cuban literature.
Sobre todo los exponentes de la poesía que hubo en esa época.
Especially the poets who came out of that century.
Él ha citado a unos cuantos, a Cenea,
Cenea is another one. I didn't talk
a
about
José
Cenea.
Martí, pero hay muchos más.
Sí.
Pero sobre todo,
But there are many
también
more. There are many.
me llamó la atención sobre lo que dijo acerca del periodo de comienzos del siglo XX.
Yeah, I was impressed by what he said about the beginning of the 20th century.
Pero más todavía en la segunda mitad del siglo XX.
But even more in the second half of the 20th century.
Yo pertenezco a esa generación.
I belong to that generation.
Nos tocó, yo nací en 1961.
I was born in 1961.
O sea, nací un año y medio después de la Revolución Cubana.
A year and a half after the triumph of the revolution.
Crecí en medio de esta ola, de este cambio que muchos vieron con una perspectiva muy buena en el continente americano.
I was born in the midst of this wave, this change that many people saw as very positive for the Latin American continent.
Yo también creí en la posibilidad de que pudiéramos, aquellas autoridades iban a construir un modelo realmente donde cabríamos todos.
I too believed that those authorities would build a model into which we would all fit.
Sin embargo, la realidad se impuso y en 1993 decidí romper públicamente con el miedo y sobre todo la doble moral.
Reality imposed itself, and in 1993, I decided to break away from fear and the blah blah blah.
You're doing wonderful.
Bueno, desde entonces,
Since then.
mi vida y la de mi familia
My life and that of my family
ha sido muy complicada.
has been very complicated.
No es fácil en Cuba
Not easy in Cuba
situarse en el lado opuesto
to place yourself on the opposite side
a lo que dice el partido único.
to what the one party says.
Estoy aquí invitado como poeta
I have been invited here as a poet,
y realmente yo creo que es importante hablar de eso, de mis inicios en
and
esta
I think it's important to speak about that and about my beginnings
y
as a
realmente
poet.
Lo que verdaderamente me expolió, me inspiró a escribir poemas, a escribir versos fue
What truly led me to write poetry.
lo había hecho anteriormente, por supuesto,
I had done it before, of course,
pero la gran inspiración vino en las condiciones más adversas
but the
que he
great
padecido
inspiration came in the most adverse of circumstances
en mis 55 años de vida.
in my 55 years of life.
Y fue cuando estuve 9 meses en una celda de 3 metros de largo por 2 de ancho.
And that was when I spent 9 months in a solitary cell of
3 metros de largo por 2 de ancho.
3 meters deep and 2 meters wide.
Estaba allí cumpliendo una sanción de 18 años de privación de libertad.
I was there with a sentence of 18 years of privation of liberty.
Por el único hecho de ejercitar mi derecho a la libertad de expresión.
My only charge was to limit my. Tienes que repetir eso porque.
O sea que yo fui a la cárcel por ejercitar mi derecho.
Yes, I went to jail for exercising my right to free speech.
O sea, aquella soledad yo
solitude.
la tuve que llenar con versos, expresándome.
I saw the need to fill that solitude with poetry, with verses.
Yo estaba a 1000 kilómetros de mi casa. Yo estaba en la prisión de Guantánamo.
I was 1,000 kilometers from home in the prison of Guantanamo.
Y por eso, desde esos días del 2003,
And for that reason, since 2003,
yo hice un compromiso eterno con la poesía.
I made an eternal compromise with poetry.
Allí comenzó, floreció
There began or flowered
mi trabajo en esta, yo le diría la madre de la literatura.
my work in what I call the mother of literature.
Yo también estoy escribiendo mi 9º libro acá en Harvard.
I am presently writing my 9th book here at Harvard.
Y realmente puedo decir que la poesía, aunque esté menospreciada en estos tiempos, la literatura y sobre todo la poesía,
And even though literature and especially poetry is not very well accepted,
siempre van a hacer falta poetas.
Poets will always be necessary.
Yo creo, para mí, es el
I
camino
believe that for me,
para establecer puentes.
that is the road, that is the way to establishing
Para
bridges,
denunciar también,
to denounce as well.
pero yo creo que más allá veo la
But beyond
poesía
that, I see poetry
como un medio, como un canal
like a medium
para engrandecer nuestros
channel
pueblos.
to enhance ourselves.
No quiero terminar sin antes agradecer
I don't want to finish without first acknowledging and appreciating
a todas las personas que han hecho posible que
all
yo
the
esté aquí
people who have made possible my visit here
en este podio hablando
in this
ante
podium,
ustedes.
speaking before you.
Quiero agradecer a Jane Hunru, la directora del programa Scholar at
Jane
Risk,
Unruh,
a la que pido un aplauso,
Director of Scholars at Risk program,
y a otras personas más
and other people
que ojalá y pueda verlas, que no son de este
whom
país,
I hope I can see
que fueron
sometime.
los
They're
que me
not here.
nominaron a esta beca
Who were the
del-
ones who nominated me
del
for
PEN
this
inglés.
for this fellowship.
También agradecerle a Ana McDonald, que trabaja en el
Also,
departamento de inglés.
to acknowledge Anna McDonald, who works in the English department.
En fin, todas las personas que hicieron posible
And finally, all the people who made it possible
que convirtieran en realidad
to make real
mi primer viaje al exterior
my first trip
en toda mi
to
vida.
the exterior in my life.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Y
You take over now, please.
ya, ok. Este poema se llama, lo voy a leer en español. ¿Los dos? Bueno, voy a leer estos dos poemas que del libro que les mencioné que estoy escribiendo desde mi estancia acá en Harvard. Se llama Espera. Tras el ruido de la lluvia, puedo oír las señales de su cercanía. Por eso me mantengo bajo la cobertura del alero que se yergue en este tramo de calle sin nombre, cubierto con la misma capa de ilusiones y dejando que mis ojos crucen la pared de agua a ver si regresan triunfantes con la casualidad hecha pedazos y un mensaje encarnado sin la más leve rasgadura. Ella va a tocar mi puerta de húmedos anhelos antes que el telón de la tarde caiga sobre los muros de la ciudad. Lo hará con el dorso de la mano derecha, levemente, una vez, quizás dos, antes de que siente el crujir de mi pecho, abriéndose de par en par, como el parto de la primavera en la borrosa frontera del invierno.
And now I'll read the translation. Hope. Behind the clamor of the rain, I can hear the signs of her nearness. Thus I keep myself beneath the protection of the eaves raised along this section of nameless street, overcast with the same layer of dreams, and allow my eyes to cross the water wall to see if they return triumphant, coincidence shattered, and a message embedded without the slightest tear. She will knock on the door of my damp longings before the curtain of the afternoon descends around the city walls. She will do so with the back of her right hand, lightly, one time, perhaps two, before I feel the cracking of my chest opening itself wide, row upon row, like the birth of a spring on the blurred border of winter.
Este se llama Delito. El objeto que amaso con mis sedosas pupilas transpira su belleza por cada poro, palpita como un corazón joven, articula con la brisa unas manos que acarician todo mi cuerpo sin pedir nada a cambio. Es la tarde asomándose en el balcón del otoño con sus vestiduras de colores y un opaco sombrero de sol. Soy el autonombrado propietario de esta pieza robada en los anaqueles de octubre. Perdonen mis reincidencias. Es un delito que llevo a cabo a la misma hora en casi todas las estaciones.
Misdemeanor. The object I gather with my silken pupils perspires its beauty through every pore, beats like a young heart, assembles from the wind hands that caress all my body without asking change of anything. It is the afternoon, appearing on the balcony of autumn with its colored vestments and a dark hat of sun. I am the self-proclaimed owner of this stolen piece on the shelves of October. Forgive my recidivism of this misdemeanor I carry out at the same hour in almost all of the seasons. So we were going to take a short break, and then do a workshop translating another one of Jorge's poems that he's going to read for us afterwards when we're actually getting our hands dirty with it. So, break time. Okay, so now we will start the second half of the program. This is going to be much more informal, so feel free to, get up, move around, partake of the beverages and food. And I think we're scheduled for a half an hour, but, if we're having a lot of fun and you want to stay, I'm down to do that too. So, since this is a very short workshop, does everyone have a copy of the Spanish? And I did a very rough English that we can work with for the non-Spanish speakers as well. Yes. Yeah, Christina's got those. So since this is a really short workshop to translate a poem, I want to start by placing all of you directly inside of the translation process. And to do that, we kind of need to identify where we're going to be, what the space is going to be here. So for me, every translation I've done has gone through 3 different stages. The first is reverence, the second is aggression, and the final is harmony. And in the first stage, I just read the text over and over again. I take notes, and I sometimes get little glimpses of what I think the translation is going to be, what it's going to be in English. But this is a time when I work only with literal meaning. No step is taken without consulting a dictionary. So I brought some dictionaries that we can use tonight. The Academia Real, which is just in Spanish, Spanish-English. I have an iPad. We can look at Word Reference, which is a great online site, and the Thesaurus, which is my favorite book ever. So this is also the stage when I start to map my translation priorities. Any poem is a unique constellation of specific coordinates, intersections of the poet's own voice and the language that he exploits. The translation of such demands a certain amount of pairing, as only some facets of the original can be translated in the destination language. Many must be left behind, as they are inextricable from their native tongue. These priorities can change depending on the poet, the language, and the poem, but I think it is important that we identify them in this first stage, and I think we'll do that together in a second. The second stage is aggression, and this is where I want us to be for this period that we're here together. This is when you can begin to commit acts of violence upon the original text. It's at this point that the translator is the most distant from both the original and the destination. The origin and the destination. Out on the furthest curve of my orbit, I tend to unmake the poem completely at this stage, tinkering with various readings, projecting myself and my experiences on the text, bending words where they cannot go in English or in the original language. Much of this work, the work at this stage, is later let go, corrected and undone. And yet this stage cannot be skipped over, as it is in this stage that one shifts from being an avid reader to a translator, a creator in your own right. And the final stage is harmony, when you turn back again to the original, having circled around to it once again and face it. This stage tends to be full of aha moments when I see what is in front of my face all along. This is the fastest part of the process, clicking everything back into place. So given our time constraints, I wanted to dive us right into the second stage. So I have this kind of very literal translation for you, and I did not change word order. I started to expand a little bit on certain word meanings, but I tried not to do that too much because I'd like to have you guys push and expand those. But before we get into that, I would like to return to the question of priorities, because these are the paths that we project into the translation, and they are crucial to the process, I think. And these priorities fall into 2 categories. One are our overarching philosophical approaches to the poem, and the other is site-specific identifications within the poem of the load-bearing words or certain images that we cannot let go and we want to make sure and bring over. So I thought maybe I could ask you guys, because I know there's a lot of extremely talented translators in this audience, what some of your priorities are when you, I thought we could identify a few when you translate a poem, in terms of your larger scale approaches to it. There it is. I'm going to write them down.
Okay. Well, for me, first of all, looking at if there is a very, looking at the metric and the structure of the poem, because
so
that's something that's...
Fidelity to form, would you say?
Yeah, if it's going to be, because if there is a very strict structure to the poem, that's going to be even harder to try to represent that. And you have to decide whether or not you're going to try to go with that or just throw it overboard.
Okay,
from
great.
the start.
Can you pass these around?
So one thing that I like to do when translating anything is fidelity to the feel of the word.
Okay.
So, for instance, I translated most recently a poem from Croatian to English, and one of the words was nebo, which they use today to mean sky, but more literally it means heaven. So
could I say texture?
I would say
of
the
language?
heavens instead of sky.
Yeah. Well, could I say the texture of the language?
Sure, yeah.
That'd be okay. Great. All right. Anyone else?
I would like to mention two things. One is the suspensions of meaning, because poems, I would say a lot of poems delay or refuse meaning making.
Yeah.
And that is either by being ambiguous or by the line breaking. So actually there's something in the way the language and the language and the meaning progresses and then doesn't progress, and that has several levels, both the word meanings but also suggestions in the acoustic. I'm sorry, that's a bit too long for you.
Would you say like the convergence and divergence of words and meaning, language and meaning?
I wouldn't say that, but I'm happy for
ambiguity?
you. Yeah.
Okay, preserving ambiguity.
Preserving them or respecting. Anyone else?
Anyone else?
I very quickly. I mean, it's just you get from Walter Benjamin the intention
Yes.
of the original. So I think it's necessary to try and reach for that.
Yeah.
What is the intention of the original?
All right. Anyone else? Is that it? I think these are. This. Oh yeah.
I just add
Yes,
music.
please.
The
Music. Yeah. Would that include like aesthetic music or yeah? All right. So I thought maybe we could each write. There's no cards going around. Each write what our priority is, and as a group, we're going to separate into smaller groups later, and work on part of this poem with people of like-minded priorities, and then come back together. So write down on the card what your priority is.
One of those.
Yes, one of these would be great, unless you think maybe you can find someone else in the room that shares one that's not on this.
Is it those five though? I can't see.
Yeah, sorry. We have form, texture of the language, preserving ambiguity, intention, and music. So write it down and then we'll come back to it in a second. So if you look on the sheet of the English translation.
Wait.
Oh, did everyone get those? No? Intention, music, fidelity to form, preservation of ambiguity, and texture of the language. That's it. So if you look on the English translation, or you can look on the Spanish, I broke the poem into two different parts because the beginning of the poem is more straightforward, And then the second half of the poem kind of explodes out into a little bit more. Yeah, that'd be awesome. But before we get into that, I was going to invite Jorge to come up and read it to us in Spanish, so we can hear it in its original state.
Ahora, hablar sobre...
Solo leer el texto ahorita y después podemos preguntar.
¿Cuál?
El Muertos Vivos.
Ah, no lo tengo.
Does anyone have a copy of that?
No, y no me lo sé de memoria. Muertos vivos. No es necesario conocer la profusa lista de nombres, las fechas en que llegaron a este lado del mundo, el peso de los años esparcido en sus espaldas, los tonos de la piel, la estatura del intelecto, el monto de sus salarios, si beben agua potable y le ganan el pulso al hambre. La urgencia está en poblar sus pechos deshabitados y oscuros, que siguen marchando al compás de las consignas. Dicen que es el pueblo vibrante y comprometido con el discurso de los dueños absolutos de la luz. En realidad son los muertos que salen de sus tumbas con el permiso de sus enterradores.
Gracias. So I thought now we could just dive into it and do it in kind of real time. We'll go line by line. Once we get to the middle of the poem, we'll break off and do a little bit like that. So ahora vamos a empezar a traducirlo y después podemos
traducir.
Sí, gracias. Yeah, so Christina's going to be our scribe. Yeah. Does everyone have copies of the Spanish and the really rough... Aquí está. No. Los lados. And the really rough English? Esto es otro. Okay. So we can start with the title, Muertos Vivos. When Jorge sent this poem to me originally, it already had a name that he thought zombies, but I asked him if we could move it back to Spanish, since we are translating it, and start from the beginning. Does anyone have any thoughts about...
The Living Dead.
Linda?
The Living Dead.
The Living Dead.
But I love them.
I was like, Linda. Yeah.
Oh.
There you go. Oh, here's another one that works too.
Linda or the Living Dead?
The Living Dead, yeah.
Okay.
Was the original zombies, or was that a translation?
It was one of the versions of the poem, so we could.
We can argue for that.
Well,
Yeah.
I was gonna say revenants.
What?
Revenants.
Ooh, that's nice.
Wow. Revenants with a T or
T-S.
that?
E-N.
This?
Yep.
Does the original doesn't have a definite article, right?
No.
So revenants is from that perspective closer to the original, which doesn't. I don't want to. I'm just making an observation.
Yeah, because it doesn't have
don't
los.
speak Spanish.
Yeah.
Oh, I was too quiet. I was just
So
wondering
you mean
about the
just Living
definite
Dead?
article.
Yeah, just do Living Dead instead.
Just as a more literal
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
approach. Or we could just parenthesize the article.
Yeah. Living Dead. I like that. Anyone want to jump into the first line? I think so. Let's go ahead. Yeah. Oh, we need a mic.
We're just recording this.
I kind of condensed a little bit. It's unnecessary to know the abundance of names.
Great.
You can keep going.
Well, I was wondering if anyone has any changes, because I thought we could do it kind of in real.
Can we have dead alive?
Ooh, yes, we could. I like that too.
Sorry, I didn't cap it.
Anyone else, the first line?
I would say no need to know.
Uh-huh.
No need. To know the long list of names.
The long list of names, okay.
Yeah.
That line reminds me of Rilke's archaic torso of Apollo, which does begin, we don't, or uses the phrase, we don't, try to remember the exact line, but it's escaping me.
We don't know.
We don't know something, something, something. And somehow, all of a sudden, as soon as he said it, I inserted the we don't need.
Ooh, yeah. Well, there definitely
Again.
is a we and a they element in this poem.
Yeah, except that it's an indefinite a phrase, an indefinite construction, so
Yeah.
that there's no subject.
Yeah.
It's an indefinite.
Did you have to?
I was just saying on so it is indefinite, but it also might suggest it's almost an accusative. An accusative could overlap, and of course, then we're moving into maybe some, adding some value that's not there, but it seems to be in a mode of direct address.
Yeah. Yeah, because the them is not the speaker.
Yeah, or direct address to oneself.
Yeah. Yeah.
No necessary to know the confused list of names.
Not necessary.
Thank you.
Just, you mean just do this?
Yeah, it's not.
It's not?
Yeah. I think it's
Or
not,
not.
right?
I just wanted to know necessary.
No necessary. Yeah.
If it's grammatically.
No.
But I don't want it. It's just directly no.
Just no.
I just don't want to destroy the other version.
Anyone else?
Well, can you say, or is it just too literal? Because I think if you just say it is not necessary to know the long list of names, it just is very clear, but I don't know if it loses some beauty. But I kind of like it. I like the long and list, list.
Sorry, on my notes.
Necessary in English doesn't have the same music that it has in the Spanish, though. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, music is one of our priorities.
Maybe instead of know, we could say recognize. That's closer to the root of conocer.
It's not a conocer, it's not a vision, right? It's
No, but recognize, recognoscere, and conocer comes from cognoscere.
But did you have an idea?
I mean, it's
Sorry.
I mean, it's like acquaintance, right? But it's an acquaintance which is like often. So it's not no, it's necessary to conocer. So like to be familiar with or something.
Well, there's that element that it's no, but it's
a certain kind of knowing.
Yeah, it is a certain kind of knowing. It's not wisdom.
But it's doing double work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you have to put the familiar in? I mean, I don't think that would be.
Release line. It's simple and clear.
I know. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Las fechas en que llegaron a este lado del mundo.
If you can you try to raise your hand for me just so I can...
Oh, poor Barry.
Don't worry if we don't catch it.
Yeah. Anyone want to take a crack at this one?
I'm going to write cursive this time, folks.
Yeah.
The second line?
Yeah.
The dates on which they arrived to this side of the world.
Okay. Anyone else? Should we?
Or the dates they got to this side of the world.
Ooh, yeah.
The dates of their arrival on this side of the world, which is not the same syntax, but
Yeah.
it has a certain concision that might come in. It has a certain concision that might come in handy because we are working with a list.
Yeah.
And we need to see how the list works out. So we actually need to suspend our strategy anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah? Oh.
If concision is to be taken into consideration, then perhaps the dates they arrived to this. I just totally forgot what I was going to say. Never mind.
She might already be making the change, but the dates which arrive on this side of the world.
Oh.
I don't think the on's in the wrong place there, or it's not necessary there.
On this?
The dates
Which-
arrive
which-
on this side of the world.
Which they or?
It's the date that the people have.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah.
It's digressing.
Sorry.
We're
Yep.
supposed to digress.
Yes. What were you going to say, Erin?
No, I was just saying that they're referring to people.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, so you need the they.
Well, do we? Just okay. Which they? So it's sort of back up there.
Yeah.
So the day is included in the verb in the Spanish. So it is not here. In English we need to make it explicit, but it's not explicit in the
It's
Spanish.
in
It's just
llegaron,
in the
yeah.
because it's the way it's conjugated. Okay.
Yeah. Next line.
The weight of years they carry on their backs.
Doesn't this fall the spine?
It's back.
Spread, scattered, strewn.
Yes. Yeah.
Bear on their backs? Or they wear on their backs? Oh, I like bear.
There.
I said carry, but I prefer bear. Oh, well. Espa.
Esparcido.
Yeah, I would say spread on their backs.
Yeah.
Esparcido, it's kind of spread around, so it's going to spread on their back.
Spread over their backs?
Spread on their
Is it plural
and
back?
with the spread, it would be without the they, but the weight of the year is spread on their back.
The weight of years spread on their backs. Yeah, that's nice.
I still like the word carry. There's something very specific.
That's true.
Yeah, that was mine. I was jumping. Yeah.
What is the connotation of esparcido, and what does the author or what does it suggest? And
Yeah.
is it is the fact that the weight is put on? How is it put on? I don't speak Spanish.
Yeah.
So I think we would have to look at exactly what does esparcido mean and what does it suggest.
Okay.
So it's not just
Jorge.
about,
Yeah,
Okay.
what we think sounds better.
and I don't know.
Jorge, ¿nos puede hablar un poquito de su intención con la palabra esparcido?
Bueno, es como el peso repartido
A shared weight.
por su espalda, repartido, ¿no?
Shared
Pegado,
weight.
¿no?
Yeah. So spread. But that's an interesting idea that it's shared.
Share.
Yeah.
Spread among
Yeah.
their backs?
Or shared. Or
The share.
Spread among their backs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Spread among?
Yeah,
Across?
suggested.
Can we ask Jorge another question?
Yes, let's ask him. Yeah.
¿Cada uno tiene un peso en su espalda? ¿O era que o sea, el peso estaba entre todos?
No, cada uno.
¿Repartido o cada uno?
Es cada uno, de cada uno. Ajá.
Okay. So she was asking. Wait.
Okay, so I was saying, when you talk about the weight on on the backs, do you mean each person has a weight on the back? Or it's like one big weight spread across everyone? And he said, no, I'm talking about each person has this weight that's spread out on their back.
Uh-huh.
Sí, yo me refiero, yo comienzo el poema en plural.
Oh, okay.
Stay with it.
So the speaker's plural. Okay.
Sí, ya lo digo ya desde el primer verso. No es necesario conocer la profusa lista de nombres
Okay.
plural, not
Okay.
names.
So in the beginning, he starts with the plural, with the nombres, it's names. It's not just one name. Que no es solo un nombre. Okay. ¿Otras preguntas? The next two lines are pretty. Anyone want to take a crack at them?
I think tones works best because it's most faithful to.
The tones?
Yeah.
The tones of the skin? Or to the tones of skin?
In this one, I would take the liberty to kind of put an implied there, the tones of their skin, just because I think it sounds better in English.
Their complexions.
I'd be interested to hear other Spanish translators talk about what they do with words that are, they call them false cognates sometimes, but I don't know that. Do you usually go for the one that we have the same word in English, or do you try to push against that? So I always usually tend to try to get around. Yeah.
In this case, skin tone. We do use in English, so you
Yeah.
could say the tones of their skin. I like the there.
Yeah.
The complexion, he didn't say the word complexion in Spanish, so
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I do like his suggestion of
Yeah.
adding there because it adds the flavor.
And it
Instead of an
maintains
instead
that.
of an article, which is kind of sterile,
Yeah.
there is more personal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, where do and this is every translator is different, but I tend to go with the simplest, not lowest, but the common denominator, the most common denominator. And tones isn't working for me, right? So I try to think, well, what's the most common English phrase? Well, the color of the skin. The color of their skin, and I work from there.
Yeah.
I may keep that, I may change it, but I'm always trying to think, what is the most approachable?
Yeah. Color.
And if I may, I mean, I know a lot of people are already in love with the possessive there, but if you look across the lines and you see sus espaldas, la piel del intelecto,
Yeah, that's I'm glad you pointed
and then
that out.
again sus salarios.
Yeah.
So I would actually tend to think that there's a reason why it's so. Just a small.
Yeah. Yeah. There's not a possessive. Yeah. Yeah. Nos puede.
Well, oftentimes in Spanish, the possessive is implied. So
Yeah. When in a list, would it be absorbed?
It's
Okay.
implied, so you don't need to use it.
Yeah. Okay. Because I noticed that difference right away too. All right. So it's implied.
I have a question.
Yeah.
These three, the Thomas and Elastostatura and Monto, those three together, is that a kind of bureaucratic language? Like, is it possible to say something like color, IQ, monthly income, or net worth, or like, you know what I mean? Like, is it the kind of thing that you'd say in like an APB when you're trying to describe a person, maybe on their passport before photographs, or do you know what I mean? Like, is it a kind of description that we use conversationally, or is it the kind of description that you might use on a form or a census, or?
That's particular to the poem. Oh, sorry. It appears to be particular to this poem.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it does have the kind of that effect a little bit. Well, how can you reduce the they down to these attributes?
I would say that it's not quite as clinical as kind of a descriptor. It's a very lyric way of presenting these things. You usually don't refer to the amount of money someone makes by el monto de sus salarios. You just say cuánto ganan. So I think preserving certain lyricism in the phrases would be closer to the intention.
I lost that line, but I have faith.
Yeah, we haven't. We haven't.
I bunched those three together.
Yeah.
No question.
We haven't done the next line. Should we break off now? Yeah. Yeah.
Or how much should we ask?
Yes, because we have. I think we should ask Jorge when we get. Maybe he could go
Or
around
actually
to different
go
groups.
around to the groups.
Yeah, let's do that. So does everyone have their card? Can we find other people that have that card, and we're going to break off into groups and
This
translate?
doubles as a dating.
Yes.
We'll read the poem probably
In many
several times.
Yeah. And we're starting with you, sir. So the title?
Title, yeah, we should do that.
Your version of the title. And if you haven't done that line, what happens?
Yeah, we haven't. We
started where we left off from the group.
Oh, sorry, yes, we're talking about the stanza that they translated.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Remember?
Yes. All right, so then we should have some.
Are we going to cause anxiety by doing this? What would you like to do?
We didn't get very far.
You didn't get very far. So maybe
foray.
people should share their favorite version of one of their lines.
Okay, let's do that.
And we'll pass it around. Who is willing to share? Even it doesn't have to be in order. Just your first, and then you can tell we're so organized.
Yeah, just your favorite line.
So the first line we translated, which I think was probably the best of our endeavors, was the measure of their intellects.
That's nice. Yeah, that's very nice. And people can randomly raise their hands if they feel they haven't been represented by that gesture. Next.
Are we going in order?
Nope. Your
Any
favorite
line
line.
that you
Here.
learn.
I'll do one.
I'm just gonna. Sorry, I'll pass it.
So if it's okay, I'm gonna read the favorite stanza. The last stanza is my favorite one that we translated, and we translated as, "In reality, it is the dead that climb out of their tombs with the permission of the ones that put them there."
Thank you.
Oh yeah, this thing doesn't even amplify. The last two lines.
The fake mic for
Or not the last two lines. The last two lines on the first side of the page, rather. If they take clean water and gain ground ahead of the pushing hunger.
Nice.
Yeah.
Even random fragments are fine.
I mean, can I just, because someone talked, what was it, the height of their intellect? And the measure of the intellect, and we sort of resisted that, and we talking about the depth of their understanding, which we sort of like, because the depth is actually just the opposite of the so anyway, and well, would you like to? No, we did some things that we probably shouldn't.
No, please share.
And I would not.
On the contrary.
No, and
Transgressions are
David
welcome.
really.
You're the expert.
No, we were working on the. We were thinking about the last line on the first page and the hunger, and we were, and it's still work in progress. But we were talking if they conquer of their hunger, and then we were working with a number of things, synonyms for pulse. And we were interested in the idea of beat or even heartbeat, even though that's walking away from what pulse may say.
Yeah.
But we also have the drum of the hunger, and we had the hum of the hunger, but thought it was maybe a little bit too much. The resonance, the reverberations of their hunger, and then we had the throb of their hunger, but we sort of like thought that maybe a little bit too sexual.
Yeah.
And this is a very old thesaurus, so I think didn't have the connotation yet.
Yeah. Those are nice.
A different version of the same lines here. We had a very big difficulty with this line, especially. So, whether they drink clean water or they surpass the drive of their hunger.
That was a very vocal group back near the cereals and journals. Does anyone wish to share?
Yeah, but you had some good points.
Well,
He just had one. See,
well,
he just said to me.
Yes, but forgive me, Jorge, perdono. If they have clean water to drink and can keep one step ahead of hunger.
Ooh, nice. Yeah.
Good. Yes.
That's our sense.
That's mine.
Yeah, another interpretation of that line. And this one, so in this one, I kind of had a. So, el pulso can also refer to arm wrestling. I asked Jorge about it, and that was the image that he was going for. So I proposed if they drink clean water and beat hunger at arm wrestling, which is very colloquial, but it's also kind of in the mood of general, more colloquial mood of the poem.
Yeah. Jill?
I'm still, the top of the back page. The important thing is to move into the dark and empty rooms of their bodies, still marching to some beat they've been given. I like the silence after I read it. That's really good. That's good.
These are all wonderful.
Shall we do like 5 more?
If people love more. Maybe.
Or should we see? Did you want to talk about?
Yeah, so a local poetry magazine, Spoke, is really interested in publishing some translation of Jorge's work, Pablo's introduction. We were thinking maybe we'd come up with a final, oh, here it is, a final version tonight, but I think we're just coming up with a lot of questions, which is good. But I was going to say, if anyone wants to sit with these poems or think about these poems further, you can send them to me, and maybe we can put together a nice portfolio of his work, because they really would like to feature a bunch of the poems from the new book. So I'll put my email up here.
And you have other poems of Jorge's that you could possibly get permission to share.
Yeah. Yes, I have a few, and I'm sure Jorge would send more. I hope.
You want to let him know what that is?
Yeah, estamos hablando de él.
Should he finish this?
Si quería.
Yeah.
Esto es la.
Esa es la revista. Sí. Y no sé si tienes algo más que quieres decir.
Sí, bueno, tú vas.
Pues bueno.
Bueno, decirle que ha sido una maravillosa experiencia.
This was a marvelous experience.
Ojalá y se repita en el futuro.
I hope we can do it again in the future.
Sobre todo ha sido algo que no tengo palabras para sentir toda la felicidad que siento por haber tenido esta oportunidad.
He doesn't have words to express the happiness that he's had from this experience.
Sobre todo compartir poemas de un libro que estoy escribiendo. O sea, es un libro que todavía está por nacer. Pero ha sido... Sí.
These poems come from a book that he's still working on that still is being born.
Y estoy verdaderamente contento por ver a tantas personas amantes de la poesía.
It makes him very happy to see so many people that love poetry.
O sea, las personas que se niegan a aceptar que la poesía no vale nada. O sea, que la poesía es un género menor.
There's many people that believe that poetry doesn't have any value.
Gracias a todas las personas que han venido acá. Les agradezco enormemente su presencia. Y ya tengo fe. Tengo fe en que compartiremos otra vez, pero ya con el libro completo, con otros poemas.
Okay.
Muchas gracias.
He has faith that we'll do this again, but with the whole book.